Okay, so hello, Nisambula Vinaka, Noaya, Kamnamori, Kiora. Hello, Olgeta. Namaste, Namaskaram, Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the final session of our 3-day conference. We will start this session with Mr. Ravi, whom it is my pleasure to introduce. Mr. Ravi is a well-recognized figure amongst Gurmit scholars. He was a member of the New York Bar. He has been an activist, a parliamentarian, a newspaper columnist, and media consultant. Mr. Ravi, can we have your thoughts about future directions, please?
Namaskar, Assalamu alaikum, peace, grace, and hope. I first pay obeisance to the divinity as mother, who we are worshiping during this period of Navrat. I am honored to have been invited to offer these remarks on the status of Gurmitians and their future prospects. At the conclusion of this conference on the old and new indenture, labor practices and human rights, I have read the abstracts of all the presentations and listened to quite a few, and I must commend the high quality of the discourses. I will focus on our place in the world, and my presentation will be pitched at 3 levels of generality: at the individual, the group, and finally, the global, to integrate the wide number of concerns explicitly or implicitly raised by the presenters. Unfortunately, let me warn you, it will get a bit abstract, so bear with me. I begin my talk with an anecdote from the individual level, from where in our tradition we're told that all truth begins. It was in August of 1989, and I'd been living in New York City after college since 1972. The year before, I'd made a decision to return to my native Guyana when we commemorated the 150th anniversary of the arrivals of Indians to Guyana at Columbia University. In New York, I had discovered new aspects of my quote-unquote Indianness as I encountered Indians from the Caribbean islands such as Trinidad and Jamaica, and also from India. There was one Fijian Indian I got in touch with, Ganesh, from whom I learned the word Girmitya. I was one of those who helped organize that first Gopio conference in the Sheraton in Manhattan in 1989, and got to know more intimately some persons who we're now calling NRIs. But it was during the sub-conference on political participation, of which I was the co-chair, that I realized while all Indians from across the globe had much in common, we, the descendants of indentured servants, Girmitias, we had a special bond. We were as close together to each other as those from India, whom I got to know and who grouped themselves regionally, say like Gujaratis or Bengalis. During the conference, we discovered that the perspectives of the NRIs and the Girmitias on politics were literally worlds apart. The NRIs maneuvered for photo ops with Congress dignitaries from India, while we focused on our precarious political fortunes back home. From Guyana, there was Chetty Jagan there. He'd been ousted from office since 1964 and had remained in the political wilderness since. From Trinidad, there was Bastio Pandey, who had been kicked out of the 1988 coalition, to which he had brought most of the votes. There was Mahindra Chowdhury from Fiji, where the government, including Indian leader Jairam Reddy, had been overthrown in 2 coups in 1987. And finally, there were delegates from South Africa, where 4 years ago, there had been massive anti-Indian race riots with dozens killed. From Malaysia, local leaders complained bitterly about discriminatory laws that kept them at the bottom of the societal ladder. Suriname was not represented at the Gopio conference, but 100,000 Hindustanis, as they call themselves, the Girmitians, had left for the Netherlands in fear of what independence in 1975 would bring. They were prescient because in 1980, there was what was called a sergeant's coup that ousted the governments And 2 years later, 15 leaders, including several Indians, were executed by the military junta. What all of the Girmitians had in common, as far as political participation was concerned, was a history of being denied their human and civil rights as equal citizens in the countries in which they had been born. At the conference, Ganesh Chand and myself organized a breakout small islands session where leaders like Cherry Jagan and from Trinidad, Basdev Pandey and others, they examined specific challenges to our country and they passed several resolutions to address them. But to me, as memorably, and with the passage of time, I believe more significantly, a group of us Girmitians went to my home across the river in New Jersey. We spontaneously abandoned the sofas in my living room to sit on the floor, eat dal bhat, and regale ourselves about how much we shared in terms of our experiences and the culture that shaped our identities. They say the function of culture is to impose meaning on the world and to make it understandable. That we, the Girmitians, understood each other so profoundly in such a short time suggested we shared at least strands of a common culture. Today, they talk about lived experiences. Our identity, and I would like to stress the formation of that identity I alluded to, which has been discussed at length during this conference. We'd all been shipped out from India, an India that had been pillaged and looted, a Hindi word not so coincidentally. Its native cottage industries, especially in textiles, were destroyed to create millions of peasants as surplus labor that sought a vent. In the colonies, we were othered into coolies, persons suitable for providing menial labor at the bottom of that social ladder. But in an era of purported asserted enlightenment, we were subject to an agreement on the conditions of our labor. It is this agreement which we pronounce Girmit, through which we define ourselves as Girmitians, people of the agreement. I see that this act of self-naming was a seminal semiotic act, signaling our appropriation of agency. Yes, we know it was a one-sided contract. They knew it was a one-sided contract. But they kamar bande wale, as we say, they banded their dhoti to fulfill their side of the bargain, because prospects seemed better than the India they had left, and to which most chose not to return, because they felt their lot would be finished in 5 years and better would come. They knew they had the ability to produce 2 blades of grass where there was but one. Yet they were labeled docile for merely keeping their word. But when the planters broke theirs, they rebelled. They were anything but docile. These are demonstrated by the number of court cases filed against Girmitians and the number of strikes they staged. Even in the face of what one commission called the leaden argument, that's what they call the deadly shootings to the Girmitians in Guyana, Fiji, and other destinations. So we are Girmitians, people of that peculiar agreement that marked the transition from a world in which slave labor was being abandoned, but into the world of free labor that had not yet been born in the evolving capitalist world system. It was not for humanitarian reasons, as the colonizers would have it, but for the more fundamentally more prosaic reason of greater profits for the empire, that we were kept in that state of indeterminacy, not slave, but certainly not freedmen. We must explore this indeterminacy because of its lingering effects on our present predicaments. As immigrants, escaping landlessness, joblessness, famines, caste, and debt, we were determined to work our way up and out, even in the abysmal conditions the other groups in the countries rejected. Our motto, as one scholar put it, became laboro ergo sum. I am because I work. It led to the stereotype, as one anthropologist studying Guyana society reported: Indians live to work while Africans work to live. We became, however, the first Indians, since in the colonies, it didn't matter which region you came from or what caste you were from. We were all coolies, Indians. When a group is ostracized, they become more cohesive. Solidity of the group is directly proportional to the pressures imposed. We became also less bogged down by the dead weight of caste. Unlike the disjunctural, abysmal event that the Middle Passage was for enslaved Africans, our crossing induced positive changes, such as cross-caste Jahaji friendships, which we deepened as we attempted later to recreate our lives as we knew it in village India. While increasingly attenuated after the end of indentureship, we remained connected to our heritage through embodied knowledge, traditions, and artifacts we had brought. This was a signal achievement for which we must develop greater appreciation, because we did succeed in overcoming our circumstances circumscribed by the Girmit Agreement. In the first conference on Indians in the Caribbean back in 1975, our Nobel laureate Vidya Suraj Prasad Naipaul had pointed out, we forget. We have no idea of our past. It is part of the trouble. After the old culture has more or less been lost, its value overthrown, it is only today that people can begin to look at themselves. This is the first paradox, that self-awareness should have come only with that loss. Now, I want to talk a bit about the struggle of the Girmitias for their equitable share of power at the group level. So I returned to Guyana from the metropole to my village, where I'm still living, from where I'm speaking, which is a village, an appendage of a sugar plantation. They still cut cane, they still load cane, I still hear that whistle that calls our people to work at 5:30 in the morning. With the end of the Cold War in the late 1980s, cherry dragon was now acceptable to the global hegemon. Participating in the electioneering and its aftermath, I observed firsthand the consequences of democratic politics in a plural society. Donald Horowitz's social psychological theory of ethnic conflict eerily unfolded as if there was a deus ex machina. Ethnic politics in these societies are fueled by political, economic, social, cultural, and territorial claims that trigger psychological fears embedded in cultural narratives of the several groups. These conflicts are not about ethnic differences per se. Horowitz boiled down the dynamics of the conflict to a simple but not simplistic formula that we all should hearken to in each of these countries. That there's a process, when the group is formed, there are a process of group comparison that will come up against a notion of what is called group worth versus group legitimacy. And they will all transmute themselves into a politics of entitlement. When we set out as Girmitis to the various imperial colonies to labor, in each case, we encountered groups who were already there. Ex-slaves in the West Indies, Melanesians in Fiji, Blacks in South Africa, Creoles in Mauritius, etc. The one constant were the ruling whites who control the state and society through their laws, their force, and their hegemonic discursive structures, long deployed against us in India. We became paradigmatically plural societies that mixed but did not mingle. And in today's world, let us not get too excited about hopes that plural societies will dissolve into some amorphous melange of one love. We are living in an age of increasing identity politics. And the caution of Roland Barthes is salutary. It is not the internal practices of the groups that's important, but their boundaries, their perceived boundaries. It is a sociological truism that groups placed in proximity with each other will engage in a social comparison process. While initially we Girmiches were placed at the bottom of that social ladder, we gradually did move up through sheer hard work, facilitated by the same culture that was derided, but which gave us positive normative values. But at the same time, the pressures on us from the ruling class and from other groups pushed us into committing suicide, taking to alcohol, and engaging in excessive domestic violence by the other groups. There was a cost. Over time, the Girmiches, as the initial backward group, had become the progressive, upwardly mobile one. And this created a negative sense of group worth in others who felt relatively deprived through that group comparison process. What the sad thing about it was that those groups had been imbued with a greater sense of legitimacy to the national patrimony, either through being defined as indigenous by the ruling class in Fiji and Africa, or by themselves because of their earlier arrival, Christianization, Westernization, greater suffering they claim in these slave societies. They claim greater legitimacy to the national patrimony. So in the decolonizing and democratizing wave after World War II, these factors led to that politics of entitlement that I spoke about. So there's a paradox that democratic politics, which was supposed to reward everybody equally, created this politics of entitlement for particular groups. In each colony excepting Mauritius, the other groups insisted that their greater legitimacy trumped the Girmiches' democratic majority. And they could back up that claim to greater legitimacy through their strategic occupancy in the armed forces of Fiji, Guyana, and Suriname. In Mauritius, because of the supermajority they had formed, and that they were able to strike strategic alliances with the ruling French Creole whites, they coexisted relatively unscathed even to today. But those pressures are still there as the Creoles are beginning to mobilize as a group today. So even though each of those Girmiche leaders I mentioned from the 1989 GOPIO had committed to inclusive politics, racial politics, as they call it, when they went back home, as they say, they subsequently failed. We all know what happened in Fiji in the 90s, in South Africa. Even though they were part of the ANC, we brought a person from the ANC who spoke at that GOPIO conference. Yet last year in July, there were anti-Indian riots in Phoenix, where Gandhi had lived. And in Guyana, we have had a decade of riots after every election, and again last August, and we are sitting on a powder keg right now. So I want to now move to the third level that I spoke about, that third global systemic set of circumstances. So while I was in New York, circumstances gave me to appreciate these deeper structural forces that were keeping us enthralled, but are kept hidden away. I stumbled across an institution called RISM, Research Institute for the Study of Man, an innocuous sounding label that had Caribbean matters on the Caribbean more than anywhere else in the world. But it was actually a CIA front that had been set up ostensibly to study the Caribbean, but really to steer its academics to define their reality in accordance with the hegemon's own preconceived notions and ends. I learned, for instance, that modernization theory, concocted at Harvard by Talcott Parsons under CIA auspices to counter the Marxists during the Cold War. Kennedy pushed the Third World into his Secretary Rostow's stages of growth theory of development, but within that same liberal paradigm that had produced slavery and indenture, but was still going to produce nirvana for us in the Third World. We ended up with that disastrous neoliberal Washington Consensus by 1989, when I returned to Guyana. And of course, we all know it collapsed in 2008, and only this COVID is keeping it from having a meltdown into a black hole. But there were other attempts while I was up in New York to peel off the layers from this miasma, ranging from Marxism, which was dominant in Guyana, Black Power, Gramscian notions of hegemony, Foucauldian discursive practices, Derrida's reconstruction, Said's Orientalism, feminist theories, and so on and so forth. So upon those new way of trying to look at the world, the old liberal paradigm was starting to show cracks. And as Thomas Kuhn of the Structure of Scientific Revolution fame told us, that when such cracks show, new paradigms have to be created. And I would like to mention briefly one radical synthesizing critique presented at the beginning of this millennium by the Latin American theorist Aníbal Quijano, which he called the coloniality of power. While colonialism might have ended, its structural features, he dubbed it coloniality, and that remains firmly in place. Quijano posits that we were all conscripted by this European-defined modernity that began in 1492 with the conquest of the Americas. It developed and extended the structures of power, control, and hegemony that emerged during the era of colonialism. He posits that the coloniality of power takes three forms, which we must all deconstruct because they are there stifling us. These are systems of racial hierarchies, systems of knowledge, and cultural systems. I'll start with the system of racial hierarchies. Race was created to justify the enslavement of Africans using several Christian myths. But an interesting one is this great chain of being, with God on top, followed by his angels, then mankind. But in mankind, whites were on the top, blacks at the bottom, and other groups like Indians and Chinese were placed in intermediary positions. And we fought tooth and nail to maintain our subaltern status. Remember the newly minted Gandhi insisting he was a Caucasian to that train conductor and shouldn't be treated like a kafir in South Africa? That was the racial hierarchy. Race still matters and complicates our relationships with whichever other groups in countries where we Gremiches reside, and we must take cognizance to deal with it. Quijano asserts that in addition to the racial classification connected with slavery, there was the constitution of a new structure of control of labor and its products. The global racial/ethnic hierarchy of Europeans and non-Europeans was an integral part of the development of the capitalist world system. And this is where we came in. This included transitional forms such as indentureship, in which the control of labor was guaranteed without the moral opprobrium. The Girmit then is an important cog in the extension of coloniality from slavery. We represent the contradictions inherent in the myth of free labor from slave labor in that accumulation by dispossession stage of capitalism. So lastly, the system of knowledge should be especially relevant to the academics on this forum. Quijano writes, Europe's hegemony over the new model of global power concentrated all forms of the control of subjectivity, culture, and especially knowledge, and the production of knowledge under its hegemony. The question is, how do we break out? And we come to the last element, sorry, that was the second one before. That cultural system, which is a creation that revolves on a Eurocentric hierarchy and which enforces that Eurocentric economic and knowledge production system. We all ape Eurocentric norms, but in which we will invariably be second class and dubbed second rate. We therefore, in conclusion, all live within a multiplicity of colonialism. which we will have to free ourselves of. And it is because of this that if we need to have a clear idea to get our Girmiches, we have to appreciate these three levels of coloniality. For instance, why should we look down, as some of us do, at other racially or ethnic other groups when we ourselves are suffering from that scorn from others through hierarchies of race? Shouldn't we fight for equity and equal opportunity for all groups in each country in which we live, plus gender justice, environmental sustainability, and other equal forms of equity? So I come at last to part of our topic, this new indentureship, which we have to be honest with ourselves. It is actually a form of flight, just as we fled India. On this new indentureship of Girmiches who have fled their homelands, I wouldn't say much, because it may sound as if I am putting down anyone. But safe to say this, that we must accept we might have jumped from the frying pan into the fire. As the Western-dominated world system crumbles, more and more natives fleeing its contradiction from Africa and from Latin America and from Fiji and from Guyana and from all these peripheralized countries will gravitate to the metropoles. And to do what? To face a seething anti-immigrant machinery that will grow and combines racist populism with arbitrary applications of the rule of law. So what's India's role in all of this? I spoke of the coloniality of power imposed by the West on the rest of the world, maintained by physical and discursive hierarchies of power. But we are now living in a critical era, in which that order is being challenged by China and India, two Asian powers. The fulcrum is shifting. With the rise of these countries, their diaspora, of which we are part, will invariably be drawn into the penumbras of their ambition. Both Asian behemoths have signaled their intention to challenge the premises of the Western-originated coloniality of power. For instance, it has been articulated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Foreign Secretary Subramaniam Jaishankar in the latter's book, The Indian Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World. After World War II, we witnessed the transfer of hegemonic powers from Britain to the US, but this coming transfer will be from the West to Asia, will be of much more upheaval, given the depth of the changes to be engendered and which will be resisted. The Girmicha and NRI diasporas have challenged India's traditional approaches to foreign policy, which used to emphasize bilateral state-to-state relations. We, the diaspora, are increasingly being regarded as an instrument of soft power with strategic value. Whether we like it or not, we will be linked in one way or other with India. But as an aspiring great power, we must recognize that India will prioritize its interests within the present state system. And it's another reason why we Girmiches should coordinate our relations so that we can bring some bargaining power to the table when India summons. So what's the status of Girmiches today and what should we do? I refer to our Nobel laureate, Naipaul, once again, who spoke of our unprotectedness. And this is something that should command our attention wherever we are. The state is the property of all citizens. That's what it was created for. All citizens own it. And it must be manned by what Hegel called a universal class, representing all groups and strata in the nation. In plural societies, this demands that the groups be proportionately represented in those institutions of the state. If not, leaders from the dominant elements will always be tempted to force them to take sides in political conflicts, or, as we've seen, to also seize power. We have witnessed the effects of armies and police that were staffed exclusively or dominantly by other groups than the Girmiches. This British-originated policy of divide and rule further exacerbated the tensions between these groups as occurred noticeably in Guyana, Fiji, and now in South Africa. In this modern period, this imbalance in the armed forces has been the greatest threat to peace and democratic rule in the societies as a whole, affecting all groups, even the ones who feel they are in the dominant position. I now will conclude this portion of my presentation with the responsibilities of intellectuals and academics, especially you out there. And I'll do this from a Girmitia perspective. Reflecting an ancient point of view, Indian point of view, whether he mightn't have known this, Gramsci had noted, all men are intellectuals, but not all men have in society the function of intellectuals. V.S. Naipaul, in his India, A Wounded Civilization, famously wrote that it may be possible for those of us in the West, Western scholars, to study India and its traditions at the level of intellectual comprehension. But he says, they end where we merely start. What he meant is, firstly, in the Indian tradition, intellectual pursuits are a three-stage process. There is first Shravan. We listen intently to what's being said or taught. Then comes Manan. We cogitate intensely and integrate what we heard with prior knowledge. And the Western tradition stops there in our Ivy League. But there's a third step, Nididhyasan, that we must continuously assess our knowledge and information. Information, that which comes in and forms us through application and experience. Whether he acknowledged it or not, Marx, like Gramsci, was endorsing this third step when he said, the philosophers, read intellectuals, have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Now, from what I've been saying, you got to understand that the Indian intellectual tradition is unreservedly multidisciplinary because it says fundamentally, reality cannot be fragmented and presented individually as truth. Our foundational aphorism is Ekam Sat Vipra Bauddha Vadanti. Truth is one, but the wise may call it differently, but we have to put them together. So I want to challenge all the academics and individuals here who have identified as Girmityas to move from understanding the condition of Girmityas to working together to changing the lives of our people for the better. And I end finally with my recommendations. One, we must follow the fundamental peacemaking principle that you make peace by balancing powers between the groups in a society, not by abdicating it or monopolizing it. Otherwise, it leads to the power endowed opponents to claim that what we have is ours and what you have is negotiable. We see this every day in Guyana, and it destabilizes the entire society. Secondly, we face that question of legitimacy in which we all reside. From what I've heard in this conference here, our Girmitya Fijians seem to have accepted the present dispensation because they believe it offers them security. Immanuel Kant calls it the peace of the dead. But if the income statistics presented in this same conference are accurate, or they are perceived to be accurate, that psychological factor of relative deprivation from a group comparison will kick in eventually, and the groups claiming greater legitimacy will seek to rectify by whatever means necessary what they consider to be imbalances in the national patrimony. Thirdly, apart from Mauritius, we've all become minorities in our countries, but we should therefore demand equal civic citizenship, that is equality vis-a-vis the state, and cultural citizenship, that is vis-a-vis each other and the nation. And we must resist any laws or measures that discriminate against our civic and cultural rights. Fourthly, we should insist on multiculturalism to be implemented as national policies by ministries of multiculturalism. This should nurture what the Martinican philosopher Edouard Glissant called rhizomatic identity. That is, we must rework that old metaphor of culture in a country being from a single root to represent a dominant culture and identity. And we must rework it to be as a rhizome, which has many roots sprouting as it grows, and all of those roots sustaining that single plant of national culture, whether it is Indo-Fijian or indigenous Fijian. Fifthly, the coloniality of knowledge reminds us that all knowledge is constructive, and we must move from being consumers of knowledge by others to creators of knowledge about ourselves. We must launch a Girimitia University that allows us to do this. Sixthly, the Indenture Labor Route project initiated by Mauritius and UNESCO should and can solidify the connection between Girimitias by creating concrete genealogical linkages between us and India that we left, while institutionalizing our presence in our homelands with memorials, museums, and historic sites, and so on. Seventh, we should work on developing the notion of what it is to be a Girimitia. What are its lakshanas, or qualities, or the tattvas, the principles of being a Girimitia? In a word, what is our Girmitva? For that Sanskrit Girmitva, we should pronounce it in our Bhojpurais manner. What is our Girimitva? The reality of being a Girimitia. Rather than kulitude, I speak of Girimitva, with one of its essences, as I said, being to view its strand of culture as one of the many roots comprising national culture in each of our countries. In each Girimitia nation, we will recognize that the other roots in that country will influence our specific practices, but should not destroy that common root that we share with Girimitias across the world and with India. Lastly, because Girimitia Indians are discriminated against as minorities, it behooves us to collaborate across the globe to protect our minority rights that are guaranteed by international treaties whenever and wherever they are violated. In the state system that will not disappear anytime soon, as I said, we have rights to cultural and civic citizenship. As civic citizens, we are Fijian, as Guyanese, South Africans, all the rights to the national patrimony. As cultural citizens, we are Indian Fijian, Indian Guyanese, and so on, and the right to express our strand of the national culture. And among Indians, as I like to boast, with the Indians from India, we are Girimitia Indians. I thank you for your patience, and may the Divine Mother spread her arms around all of us, and indeed the entire world, all of us who are her children. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ravi, for your insights and recommendations. You have expanded on the very discussion that came up over and over again throughout the conference, which is identity politics and how can we move to a better society for all. We will now move on to another exciting development related to future directions, which is the Indenture Database Project. This will be presented by Dr. Ganesh Chand and Mr. Akhilesh Shiuram. Can we hear from you both, please?
Thank you, Farzana, colleagues, and thank you, Ravi, for an extremely good presentation. I think Ravi's presentation would keep us and the organizers of conferences on indenture, as well as anyone who is researching indenture, occupied for a number of years. He has raised extremely fundamental issues which we have been shying away from for years. I don't want to now start commenting on it, but I do thank you, Ravi, for an extremely interesting and challenging presentation. The next 10 or so minutes we are going to spend on one particular small aspect of our existence that has to do with our roots. About 1.2 to 1.5 to 2 million Indians were taken out of India from after 1833, 34, depending on what data we accept, and 1920, 16 to 20. Now, we are descendants of them. We call ourselves, at least I call myself, a Girmitia. And Ravi has thrown in an interesting challenge of the Girmitwa. One of the challenges is roots. We all know from our primary biology, a tree which doesn't have a root will fall. There are various types of roots. There's a main root and there are other branches, sub-branches of that. I don't know what you call them. I forgot my biology. That's 40 years ago. 60 years ago. Now, what is our root? Is our root the day the ship arrived and our grandfather, grandmother, grandparents landed here? Is that where our history starts? Or is there something more? Now, I have recently been saying to the government of India that you may be the government of India now, but you cannot cut me off from the year 1911 and before. I am as much part of the history of India from 1911. Why 1911? My grandfather came, left his village in 1911. Whatever happened after that is your business. But I have a full right to participate in any discourse, any dialogue on the history up to 1911. Now, for a lot of people like me, out of the 15 million descendants of Girmitias that we have now, there might be about 500, 600 who might think like me. For us, roots are important. We do need to trace where they are, if for nothing, at least satisfaction. Likewise for the slaves, the roots, we all know about the roots, the book Roots and the impact it has had on the psyche of the people. For the Girmitias, we have great difficulty tracing our roots for the simple reason that information is not available publicly, widely. They are hoarded. For indenture roots, one of the major pieces of information is indenture pass, what we call the information in the immigration department's record. Fortunately, the British were very, very particular about record keeping, and they kept these records in the offices and later on in the archives. For Fiji, there are about 61,000 pieces of records, but they are in the National Archives, very well maintained. I must say Fiji's archives have been very well maintained. It has a lot of information, but of course the archive is in Suva. It's open from 8 o'clock to 4:30 p.m. Monday to Thursday, 8 to 4 p.m. Friday. It doesn't create an environment where people who are visiting, who have only weekends off, who can go and trace the records. In year 2004, which was the 125th anniversary of the arrival of the first Indian in Fiji, a group of us, including some Europeans, started a project on digitalization of the Fiji records. And we kept on asking for the documentation from, of course, archives and the government. And that documentation was denied to us. The excuse was that you can take your personal record, your personal family record, but you don't have a right to the records of the other 50, 60,000 people. And then, of course, excuses changed. The government here said that, oh, we are going to do it ourselves. We are going to digitalize it ourselves. No, that's 17 years ago. It's a long, long, long time to take any action. Fortunately, the Australian government acted from the microfilms of the Fiji records they had. They digitalized and created images of all the indenture passes. And that's available for anyone on the National Library of Australia website. We have got access to it. The good thing is the NLA doesn't claim copyright over it. So it's available to anyone, who wants to search his or her own ancestry. But it is not a searchable database. So what we need is a searchable database. What it needs is therefore a software and entry of data. That's what the Global Gurmit Institute has been involved in. And I would like to ask Akhil to take us through the progress that we have made so far, what the challenges are, and what the conclusion will be. Chair Farzana, if you could allow Akhilesh to log in to demonstrate the progress so far. And then I'll come back at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Akhilesh.
Okay, thank you everyone for your time. So welcome to the actual demo of the Gurmit database that we have done so far. So if you look at those of you that have looked at the image of the parcel, there are multiple records, multiple fields that you can extract data from. So what we have identified 23 fields. For example, the country, the past date, full name, age, etc. And we are able to digitize those. Basically, convert it from the image to a text database that which you can use to search. Now, from the 23 fields, due to the lack of resources, limited resources, we are looking at 10 important fields. So basically the name, father's name, the pass number, ship name, date of arrival, caste, and most importantly, the information on the location. So basically the town, the village, or the district that the individual was from. Because that would be enough to kind of start the initial steps to trace your roots back to India, where your ancestors were from. But for Fiji, we have around 64,360 records. From that, the name of the individuals and the father's names have been digitized. The rest of the information, such as the age, the caste, the next of kin, we're still working on that. We have approximated around 15,000 hours remaining to fully digitize the rest of the records for Fiji. Now, once the actual digitization has been completed, the site will be made available to the public. Once it is available, so before it is available, what you can do is we'll be also looking at not only Fiji, but the millions of records from the other colonies, for example, Guyana, Trinidad, etc. Now, once the site is available, what will the public get to see? So you'll be met with a interface similar to this, where you'll be able to search the records using the name of the individual. So for example, if you knew the name, you could search using the name. If you knew the ship name, you can search using the ship name or the year they arrived or the caste of the individual. So for example, if you knew the name or part of a name, so let's say you know the letters KO were part of the name, you can use that to search the records. And you'll be met with some data. Again, it will show the name, date of arrival, the ship, the caste, and then the location of where they were from. Along with that, you can also search using the ship name. Now, for example, if this is the record that we're interested in, what you can do is here we can see a simplified summary of the records for us to search. But if we are confident that this is the record we are interested in, what we can do is we can see the details of that particular person. So you click on the print detail option, and here you will be able to either save it to a PDF or actually print a copy of the actual image, the actual pass that was used by the Gurmitians when they traveled to Fiji and the other colonies. Now, if you look at the pass here, you can see the core. We have digitized core of the information, basically the name, father's name, and then the information about where they were from, basically the village, the district, etc. Also, along with this, you'll get the actual image. Now, if those of you that looked at the image, you can see this is kind of well-kept record, but it is also very hard to read. So the digitization project to convert one record takes around 20 minutes per record. Again, it is not that easy to. So again, we are estimated around 15,000 hours remaining before we can digitize the rest of the records for Fiji. Once this is done, we believe that using this as a stepping stone, you can trace your roots back to India, at least for Fiji, for the time. So that is what we have been working on so far. Thank you for your time. If you have any other questions, you can let us know. Else, we can pass it back to Dr. Chand.
Ganesh, over to you now.
Okay, Akhil, you have to, yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. So that's the progress that has been made. We have got the software done. The hardest work is data entry, as you have had. For Fiji alone, it will take about 15,000 hours of work. The handwriting is atrocious. Some of the prints, the copies are pretty bad, so we might have to go back to the archives to look at those. But it's one of the projects, if you put it in the Ravi Dev context, is one of the small projects of the bigger picture, but a critical one. Now, a lot of people have been talking about indenture passes, digitalization. ILRP has been talking about it from 2018. We have had a pretty sorry state of experience from 2004. We have decided that we are not going to wait for others to fund it. We are going to fund this project ourselves. And I am glad that there are a handful of people who are volunteering to do this. There's a 6-person team. Akhil is one of them, and there are similar programmers like him. One of the programmers woke up whole of last night. He might be sleeping now, trying to make sure integrity of data. There are data entry people who enter information as and when they get some time. But we need 15,000 hours of work for Fiji only. Our system is pretty good. You can have millions of pieces of data. Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname. South Africa already has that information. So it's way ahead of the rest of the countries. And there too, I think most of the work was done by NGOs, not the government. Thank you very much, Farzana.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chand and Mr. Shiuram. This is an exciting development for everyone who is both a scholar and also for those who are interested in seeking out more information on the indentured roots. So thank you so much to you and your team for your commitment to this project. I know it's asking a lot of you, but thank you. Thank you so much. Now, there's going to be another exciting development, which is the launch of a new journal. Dr. Ganesh Chand, can I please ask you to provide us with the journal's introduction, please?
Yes, I will do that as soon as the technical team brings on Professor Pal online. Ranjit, what's happening with that? Is Ranjit?
We don't have him online yet.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll keep trying. The journal will be launched by Professor Paul, who is the Vice Chancellor of USP and a reputed historian himself. But while he is coming online, and Ranjit would be putting in the last bit of extra gas to get him online. One of the major problems that many academics and researchers find are credible outlets to release their research information. In this conference alone, we have had almost 90 to 100 presentations. A lot of them are original research data, original ideas. But let me tell you, our experience has been that most of the mainstream journals in the West are not interested in what happened in Wisma in a particular date, or what's happening in Bua now. We have got an audience of our own, which is about 15 million people. Ravi mentioned about a Girmitia University. Sadly, Girmit research has been missing from the curricula of almost every university outside of India. In fact, if there is any place where there are dedicated departments on Girmit research, it's in India. And of course, their interests are different. Whether it be University of West Indies, University of Guyana, University of Fiji, USP, University of South Pacific here, or other universities, the research on indentured laborers from India and Asia and their descendants has been largely the initiative of individuals who have interest in that area. And there has been a lack of outlets. We recognized this in 2017 when we had the first of this new wave of conferences on indenture. In 2017, as you all know, we celebrated the 100th year of the end of indenture with a number of conferences. One of them was in Fiji. There was one in Guyana, one in Trinidad, a number in India, including one at BHU, some in Delhi, in Mauritius, etc. Now that was a huge boost to research and interest in indenture. And those of you who have participated through the 3 days, you might have seen the number of young people who are coming up with research ideas, who have begun research. Now that wasn't the case about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you had a Girmit or indenture conference, it will be people with graying hair there. Now we see a large number of young people who are coming up. They need research outlets. One of the resolutions of the 2017 conference in Fiji was, of course, creating outlets for research, credible outlets, outlets which can stand the scrutiny of all others in the field, meaning it's a standard of an international journal. We started that work in 2018. And now this year, we are pleased to inform you that we have got a very solid team behind this journal. The BHU group, which had a conference in 2017 and followed up with the establishment of a department, had planned to take out a journal of its own. It had already started collecting papers and referring them, etc. Likewise, our friends in Trinidad, led by Dr. Premnath Gupta and Brinsley Sumaru and Senator Timol and others, they had a number of conferences, and they actually have conferences almost every year. Very interesting sets of papers are there. They had intentions, we had intentions. So we thought, why not we get together? Instead of having a number of separate journals, let us get together to take out one solid, strong journal which can stand the scrutiny of the top journals in the world. And that idea got traction. So the 3 institutions, Global Girmit Institute, the NCIC Heritage Center, and the BHU, we got together initially. And then we started talking to other institutions. And 2 of them have come on board. 2 of the critical ones have come on board. One of them is the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And I see Manish Jha is present here representing them. They have been very enthusiastic in working with us. The other is the Social Science Department of the IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, Patna campus, or Patna branch. So 5 institutions have got together to start a journal which we have named Indenture Papers, Studies on Indenture. The first volume is ready and it will be launched today by Professor Paul Ahluwalia, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Fiji. I hope Ranjit has been able to get him. He is, I think, based in Nauru at the moment, and there might be some technical issues. Ranjit, what's the progress with that? Hello, Ranjit.
Ranjit is working on getting Professor Paul Ahluwalia. Yes, we've got South Pacific
So,
Internet.
Farzana, may I suggest while try to get Professor Paul on board, we have got 3 other reps from the partner institutions. Maybe we should just change the order a bit and ask the others to speak, so that at least we don't waste time later on. Thank you.
So we'll start with Dr. Primnath Gupta, who is representing one of the partner institutions. Dr. Gupta, could we hear from you, please?
Hi, thank you very much, Farzana. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. Let me say thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words at this very important juncture of this conference. Firstly, let me congratulate the Global Government Institute on this initiative of this conference. It's been a very successful conference so far. And of course, the brains behind it, Dr. Ganesh Chand, Farzana, Ranjit, and the others. On behalf of the NCIC, we congratulate you on a wonderful experience indeed. Now, we at the NCIC Heritage Center, we are very proud partners of this Gurmatiya Journal of Indentured Papers. And we highly commend Ganesh Chand and his team in bringing this project to fruition. As he mentioned a short while ago, we started our discussions, our in-house discussions on this production of a journal in Trinidad by the NCIC. So we started that in 2020, but then Dr. Chand approached us with the idea that there is strength in unity. And can we join together and produce a journal instead of having 3 and 4 different journals? So we discussed it and we agreed with his view, with the view that we should join together and produce a journal of quality. And I'm very happy to say that the high quality of the journal that has been published so far, that is on the website rather, is really very good indeed, and tells us about the efforts that have been put behind it by the team looking after the journal. So once again, we want to say we're very proud to be part of this effort. We're very happy to join in it, and we look forward to other publications, so to continuing this project and the production of other papers as part of the journal as we continue. We also look forward to joining with other partners in the other processes that Dr. Chand mentioned earlier. So once again, we say thank you very much, and we're very proud to be part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. Can we hear from Professor Manish Jha, who is another representative of our partners?
Very good morning, Farzana.
Very good.
It is, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I could see Professor Paul Ahluwalia joining us. So I think it's for me and for our institute, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, I must say that it is our honor to be part of this process of finding our roots together and exploring our roots together. Because while work has been happening through our different centers, trying to understand what has happened, how it has happened, how it progressed, and how should we together try to see and keep that connect with the roots is something which has been bothering us. And when this process has started, and putting together the ideas, the action through reputed institutes. We were more than thrilled to be part of this process. And I think that the kind of work which has gone in terms of building the team for the journal, the quality of the journal, and the way it's unfolding, I think we will have an exciting time in future, both in terms of the process of exploration of the route, getting a sense of it and building on it, and also bringing it together, as Professor Chand was saying, that many Western and other journals have their own priorities, but we will make a kind of cutting edge journal for ourselves, and that will then be recognized world across, and they will understand that what they have been missing on. So with that note, I think I would echo the sentiment by Professor Premnath Gopinatha, and I would wish ourselves best for a wonderful journey through this journal and through these processes. So thank you all for including us in this partnership, and we look forward to contribute as much as we can.
Thank you very much, Professor Jha, for your kind words. Professor Sham, could we hear from you, please? You are on mute, I guess.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody from India. Well, this is a wonderful opportunity to associate with each one of you. In fact, this idea of launching a new journal came when Benares hosted Pravasi Bharati Divas in 2019. And I think it was Vishram who came with this idea. And since then we have been working, we have been working on launching a new journal. Rather, we are about to launch a new course on diaspora and global studies. And many of you must be knowing that Dr. Ashutosh Kumar also joined Banaras University very recently. Now he is our colleague. We are around 24 faculty members here in the Department of History. We are trying to create a small research center here at the Department of History where descendants of indentures, they can come, stay, and conduct small research before they proceed to their respective villages. Because we have been getting a lot of complaints that going through Government of India, it's a very complicated process. I think joining this team as a part of this journal is a first step for us, since most of the Girmitians, they migrated from this region, and we feel that this is our responsibility to ensure that everybody who comes from different parts of the world feels at home here at Banaras Hindu University before he or she decides to visit the village. We have a very ambitious plan. You know, when it comes to approaching the government, there are limitations, there are friends, there are institutions who are coming up, they are willing to support. I'm very happy to know that IIT Patna and Tata Institute of Social Sciences, they are also on board. I think we need to coordinate among ourselves also. I think a lot of work has to be done before we proceed further on our ambitious plan. But I'm very glad to be part of this team and look forward working in collaboration with institutions that are located here in India and abroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sham. Professor Raj, could we hear from you, please?
Good morning, everyone. Professor Ahluwalia, Professor Chand, Manish sir, Ghanshyam ji, all the dignitaries here. Happy Navratri from India. We are happy, very, very happy, and we hope that the formal MOU will be worked soon. We have had a change of director here, and IITs have their own priorities. So last couple of weeks have been for the JEE exam and all, but this is very exciting. My work has been on diaspora. I was in Canada before coming here. And when I was in Vancouver, I was part of a group that celebrated 100 years of the Guyanese there. And then I was, could see many people. Some people were of Chinese descent. so we can talk about it. I'm very, very excited about this journal. We'll hope we'll be able to contribute, especially, with the route tracking of people, as Ghansamji was talking about, that, sometimes a bureaucratic hurdle can be, disturbing. So we hope Tata Institute has a branch here, Puspenji is here, so we can involve them. They work on migration a fair bit. That's their work. So the team can be involved, and we are very excited. I won't take much of your time. All the very best. And we look to collaborate further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Raj. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Pal Ahluwalia, who will launch the journal. Wilavinaka and Shastikal, Professor Ahluwalia. It is such a pleasure to see you again. I will now introduce Professor Ahluwalia. Professor Ahluwalia is the Vice Chancellor of the University of the South Pacific. He is a renowned academic, and his main research interests lie in the areas of African studies, social and cultural theory, in particular post-colonial theory, and the processes of diaspora, exile, and migration. Professor Ahluwalia, privileged to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Farzana. First of all, my apologies that the technology was letting me down a little bit, but I'm really glad we could sort that out. And thank you very much again to Professor Chan for inviting me. It's an absolute privilege to be here today. And of course, although I'm part of the Indian diaspora from the African side of the world, nevertheless, there are a lot of things in the diaspora that we share. And so I think a journal on Indian indenture is just such an important part of what's been missing in the landscape of academic work in this area. So first of all, Pacific greetings to all of you. I'm speaking to you from a very tiny nation of Nauru. And as I said, thank you for inviting me to be part of this auspicious event. I'm indeed elated to join you this wonderful afternoon to launch the dedicated academic journal on Indian indenture. As Farzana has just said, I have a deep interest in the complexities of identity formation, in particular post-colonial theory and the processes of diaspora, exile, and migration. But I also have a lot in common with a lot of scholars in this area who will be participating in this journal, I imagine, because my early work was all on sugar. And, I think one of the titles of my books was called White and Deadly, Sugar and Colonialism. So I think this was work that I did very early in my career. And I probably, if I went back and revisited that, I've kind of moved on from that very political economy approach to want to talk about a very different way in which, most of our diasporas were constituted through sugar, and the way in which, I think Michel Foucault probably talks about this best in terms of the, not only an archaeology of knowledge, but also in terms of the way in which those diasporas were constituted really around discipline and punish. But today we can witness the movements of Indians are not only from India, but from other parts of the world. So now we're seeing different kinds of diasporas. For example, myself, born in Kenya, grew up in North America, worked in the United States, in the UK, and now in the South Pacific. So what does that really mean for our diasporas? I think those complexities are now very palpable in the way things are now changing at a very rapid way. But the story of the Girmithias is, of course, of one of immense struggle and perseverance amidst harsh adversities, yet there was always great hope for a better future. And I must say that my own university, the University of South Pacific, has a lot to owes a lot to that tradition, owes a lot to the people really from the Indian diaspora and from India itself, who have really contributed to the development of this great Pacific institution. And having to adjust to new surroundings and circumstances far from their home of origin, I think this journal will provide a whole new light on the complex social and historical avenues and experiences of the Girmitiyas. I think the perspectives and the research produced, I have no doubt, will provide that much needed education, which I think the journal seeks to carry out and influence, and the influences of what I believe are a very resilient culture and a resilient people throughout the different parts of the world. The journal we're here to launch today, titled Indentured Papers, Studies on the Girmitiyas, is a fitting tribute for those who dedicated their lives and endured, adapted with significant sacrifices that have enabled its future generation the liberty enjoyed today. And really, I suppose in a nutshell, we are the custodians of this history. And in a time where digitalization has incredibly increased the efficiency of business, e-publications, of course, allows us or gives us the opportunity to share this knowledge across multilateral channels globally at minimal cost. So I'm delighted to be able to launch this journal. I think somebody's going to do some magic. I think it's Ranjit who's going to. We're going to have a virtual launch with the unfurling of the first edition. So I'm going to turn to Ranjit to help us do that, please. Or maybe Farzana is going to help us how we do this. But I'm just absolutely delighted to be able to launch this journal.
Okay, so I think Ranjit is going to just inform us as to how that's going to be done. Ranjit, could we hear from you, please?
Okay, here we go.
So I guess the launch will be to click on that image, Indenture Papers, not down there, yeah.
Okay, there we go. Fantastic. Thanks, Ganesh.
Thanks,
Thank
Prof.
you very much, Professor Ahluwalia. So we now launch journals virtually as well. That's amazing. Thank you very much for your kind words as well. And your reminder of resilience and agency on our part is going to serve us very well as editors. So that leads me to the editors of the journal. Can I ask Professor Rupnarayan to say a few words, please?
Yes, greetings, everyone. It's a good feeling, really, to see the launching of this journal, Indenture Papers. It has been a long journey, really, from the inception of Indenture way back in 1838 in the case of Guyana to now, tonight, today. It's a glorious day. For years, I've advocated for a journal on indenture. And so I think we have turned the corner and we've hit the nail on its head in terms of having a journal on indenture. We have broken new grounds. So our ancestors will be pleased, our current generation will be pleased, and if perhaps our future generation will be pleased. So this is a momentous moment, one that we will remember. And it's a departure, really, from not having a sort of a journal of ourselves, and by the extension, the indenture, the study indenture. So this is really forward looking. And so I'm very pleased to see this happening tonight. I think that we have embarked on a very exciting journey. I'm glad to be a part of this. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank everybody who made this reality possible. Again, it is a great moment, and we should cherish this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rupnarayan. Dr. Chand, do you have any words as our first editor of this journal?
Thank you, Farzana. Thank you, Professor Paul, for doing the honors. We are extremely pleased with the kind words of encouragement. We look forward to linking up with all the tertiary institutions to ensure that clusters of research are carried out until, of course, the Grimetia University. And I don't think that will be too far from now. In the journal's journey, we have had a number of people who have been very critical to coming to the stage that we are at today. And one of the persons who has been working with us for the last few years has been Farzana. Farzana, I thank you very much. She is also part of the co-editing team. We have got 5 persons who are co-editors and over 40 people who are on the editorial board. So Farzana is one of the founding editor team, on the founding editor team. She will be editing next year's issue of Indenture Papers. And we will ask her to say a few words after a while. Lomesh Roopnarayan is also, has been very enthusiastic. He is also part of the editorial team. We have earlier had Dr. Gupta, and I'm pleased with his and his team support continuously. And we have got, of course, Professor Raj. Let me now take you through the journal's structure first and the papers that are there for us in a few minutes. I'll share the screen. Can you see that? Farzana?
No, we can see you, but we cannot see the share screen yet.
I've shared the screen.
And have you picked the right one to share once you press share screen? Yes, it's coming on now.
It's a momentary time thing. Eh? Yes. I'm in Lotoka.
Very far away from the internet connection.
Yeah. So we have got 3 sections in the journal. Indenture papers, which are fully refereed papers to international standard. These are blind peer refereed papers. Then we have Indenture dialogue, which are lighter papers, largely reflections, family histories of importance, things which need to go out to the public. And then we have got reviews. So I'll take you through the first issue. The first issue has 7 academic papers, and all these except one are from the previous conferences held at BHU and in Trinidad. There's a paper which gives a broad approach on why indenture, how it emerged by Dr. Maigu from Trinidad. Then we have a very interesting paper on India and South Africa by Movindri, and locating it within the context of the Gupta Gate now, the Gupta Gate saga. Then we have got a paper by Professor Chan Chioni from Suriname, now in Netherlands, on retainees, people who went from Suriname, the indentured people who went back. The new paper we have included is by Satyendra Pirtham from Mauritius. It's an interesting paper on vagrancy and how the Europeans, planters and the state treated people who defied the rules on the plantations. Then we have a paper by Hazel on sugar unions in Guyana and leading up to the formation of the PPP party, which is in government now. We have a paper by Halima and Perry on the data on the Muslims who went to Trinidad, and a framework paper by Farzana and Maurits on analysis of indenture. These are the refereed papers. Then we have got dialogue pieces. There are 2 dialogue pieces. One of them is by Roop Misir and Anil Misir. It's a journey of the Misir family, Roop's family and Anil's family from Guyana to Canada. and one is by Uma Sibalak on Bollywood and the culture. And we have got 2 reviews. There is a book review by Ravi Dev of a book written by Baituram Ram Harak, which is a biography of Jang Bahadur Singh, Guyana, and a review essay by Kamendra Kumar of Fiji National University on Totaram Sanade's book. Now, this is an e-channel. We have great ease now of publishing. We don't have to wait for certain number of issues before we publish the journals. As soon as the papers are ready, we will publish them. This is the editorial team. The editorial board, there are 5 co-editors, myself, the editor this year. Next year, Farzana Gounder takes over, then Lomesh takes over, and then Gansham, Aditya, and Premnath. We will decide later on them working. Then we have got a book review editor, editor of review of literature and creative arts, Ramchandra Joshi. We are going to have a book review editor, and there is an Indenture, Indian Indenture Research. They are the advisors for the journal. More or less, you'll find this is a new website we have created especially for this journal and related publications. We intend to put the Indenture database here as well, what we talked about, so that that could be also accessible to researchers to research, not only trace the, but to research like caste or gender or you name them, age profile, height and health and all that, once that is ready. So, Farzana, thank you very much. I now hand over to you, and I request you as one of the co-persons behind the journal to also say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Ganesh. And yes, I will say a few words, and the words are that Ganesh, you pulled it off. Ganesh is very modest, but we all know how much work has gone into this, and he has been a central figure. And I'd really like to acknowledge the work that he has done to get us to this point. This is exciting. It's the right time. We're connecting with people across the diasporas, and I'm sure this journal is going to do extremely well. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Ganesh. Thank you to the team behind him that has helped bring this about. So we're going to now move to the conference closing address, which will be given by Professor Biman Prasad, whom I shall introduce. Professor Prasad is an economist and is a well-known political and academic figure in the Asia Pacific. And in both these capacities, he has contributed significantly to debates on social and economic development in the region. In the academic sphere, he has led the business and economics faculty at the University of the South Pacific as dean. And he has held editorial roles in a number of journals. Professor Prasad has also led research and consultancy projects for major international organizations and has received numerous teaching and fellowship awards from universities in Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, India, New Zealand, and Australia. So it is with great pleasure that I invite Professor Biman Prasad to give his closing address. Professor Prasad.
Thank you, Farzana. Let me, first of all, begin by thanking the organizers, and especially Dr. Ganesh Chand and you, Dr. Farzana Gounder, for putting in such a hard work in organizing this conference, and for the invitation to be one of the speakers at this closing ceremony, as I want to put it, this very important and, should I say, very well organized conference. I also want to thank Ranjit Raju for providing excellent technical support to enable everyone to participate virtually. In addition to that, I also want to thank Ravi Deo for such a brilliant presentation earlier this morning and for laying down some of the future directions, not only for research, but also developing institutions such as the Girimitia University to bring together the whole Girimitia diaspora issues together. And the fact that presentations were made virtually and recorded before the conference shows how we can all still connect in the midst of this deadly COVID-19 pandemic. As stated by Ravi, I was also very impressed with the quality of papers, the research, and some of the analysis from all the presenters, especially the younger presenters. And in my view, it goes to show that there is still a lot of interest, or even renewed interest in the subject area. And some of the papers are kind of breaking new grounds and venturing into new areas and linkages to the whole history of indenture. And indeed, you know, it's linked to the present day migration challenges and policies to deal with it. So my role today really is not to provide or even attempt to summarize or analyze or make even substantive comments on the rich array of papers presented, but to encourage more research and writing in this important area. I also want to especially thank Anand Satyanand, a distinguished son of the descendant of the Girimitia, for his contribution to the Indian diaspora, not only in New Zealand, but globally. And I was very happy that he carefully articulated his own experience and shared his wisdom as to what the Global Girimit Institute could do to move ahead with the project on the museum, a very worthy project. And I think we would be very proud to see that coming to fruition. The Global Girimit Institute, as far as I know, has set itself an ambitious but achievable targets. And the successful launching of the journal by the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of the South Pacific, Professor Ahluwalia, today I think is a milestone for the outlet dedicated for researchers on Girimit. And I want to warmly congratulate the editorial team and all those involved, and especially, as Farzana said, Dr. Ganesh for bringing this journal into existence. I know there is work being done on reparation, and let me say that work in reparation is an important one. There are unresolved issues such as brutalities, tortures, and other forms of crime against humanity, which people were subjected to under these new forms of labor movements. There is, of course, widespread understanding that communities which were subjected to these sorts of crimes deserve justice. Reparative justice is a human right of people. It is already now an established law that those aggrieved can actually seek justice irrespective of the time lapse between the events and action seeking justice. The critical matter in this regard, of course, remains establishment of facts on brutalities, tortures, and other forms of crime against humanity inflicted during indenture, blackbearding, and similar forms of labor movements. And in this regard, I think going forward, the role of researchers and many of the academics who presented in this conference and others who would be joining in future conferences is going to be very, very vital. In terms of indenture experiences, migration and remittances, I would say that indenture experiences, while similar in many countries where Indian indentured laborer or others, such as those going from the Pacific to Australia, were also very different. As a result, the present situation in those countries, whether it's Mauritius, Guyana, Fiji, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, South Africa, are also very different. The issues surrounding, for example, exile, rootlessness, alienation, language loss, and racial discrimination and identity of the migrants are all common, but also different. And therefore, research and analysis of these issues in different country contexts is very, very important. And I think the launching of the journal today, as I said, is a milestone and is going to provide some very, very important outlets for academics and researchers to publish their work. Some of the papers in this conference have attempted to provide some good analysis in this respect, but I guess a much bigger focus and research activities around these issues would be needed. The difference between forced indenture and voluntary contractual labor movement now are a global phenomenon. However, it does not matter how different the challenges were during indenture compared to the modern movement of labor through contractual agreements. Some of the trials and tribulations are still there. There may be more international scrutiny, there may be more state and government support in facilitating these new labor movements, but it does not necessarily mean that workers are not exploited. There are, of course, geopolitical dimensions, economic ties, transnational networks, and other aspects that matter to countries that send migrants to other countries. For example, of the nearly 31 million non-resident Indians, an estimated 8.5 million are working in the Gulf. Indians constitute over 30% of the expatriate workforce in the Gulf states, where proportion of non-nationals in the employed population is amongst the highest in the world. Closer to home here in the Pacific, the seasonal labor movement to countries like Australia and New Zealand has its own share of challenges, and some really good research and writings on the issues and challenges surrounding seasonal labor are already available. Movement of workers from Asia, from countries like India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines to the Middle East, for example, have new and different challenges. I know that economists have generally or mainly been interested in migration and the remittances. For many countries in the Asia-Pacific region, for example, remittances account for a large percentage of their foreign exchange earnings. Globally, for example, about $514 billion in remittances were received by countries in 2020. Here in Fiji, we received about $652 million in 2020. And luckily we did get this amount, because without it, our economy and the situation of our families would have been in dire straits. However, I'm not sure if there's any recent research, although I know there was one paper which was presented in this conference which tried to look at the amount of or the kind of remittances that the Indo-Fijian diaspora has been sending back to Fiji. So perhaps more research in this area could help create not only how the diaspora communities help their families back in their own countries, but also create a better understanding of their identity in their adopted countries. The last point I want to make is about politics and governance. And this is, in my view, another important area of research that probably needs attention, and that is the role of the Girmitia. And I know Ravi touched on a number of issues, a number of important issues. The role of Girmitia in the political landscape of their countries and in their new destinations as part of the second wave of migrants. In my view, Girmit experience was not just about economic exploitation, but the pernicious control of the Girmitia by the colonial masters and those who were in charge of administering the indenture system. What sort of psychological effects and mental control still lingers on amongst the descendants of the Girmitia? A very small percentage might have broken out of it, but it appears that that kind of control and the psychological effects are still lingering on amongst the descendants of the Girmitia. And the worst manifestation of this control can be seen in the political slavery that exists in some of the Girmitia diaspora countries. And some of the relevant research questions that I think we need to ask, could be stated as follows. Are descendants of Girmitia still suffering from the psychological control? Are these control manifested in political and military control? What are the elements that Girmitia descendants are suffering from? What are the elements of control they are suffering from? Do they still suffer from a colonized mind, as some would like to put it? Are descendants of the Girmitia exhibiting a culture of psychophancy and civility? Is it manifested in the way we think and do things? I'm asking these questions because I've been in active politics, and not only as a member of parliament, but as a leader of a political party, interacting daily with so many people, including descendants of the Girmitia. And I'm kind of confronted with some of these issues and find it difficult to put it into perspective. And in the absence of specific, research focus in those areas, it's hard to understand, what might be happening. Our literature, our holy books exhibit our history as people who are argumentative and who kind of practice democracy. Nobel laureate in economics, Amrita Sen's book, Argumentative Indian, dealing with things like voice and heterodoxy, culture and communication, politics and protest, reason and identity, provide interesting insights into the pluralistic debate, dating back, if not thousands, hundreds of years in India. And so democracy did not start in India only after the British left, but with the and with the independence of India. In fact, the literature shows that it was rooted in the public discussion and public reasoning. So the question is, have we lost this because of our Girmit experience of being subjugated? And democracy is usually associated with politics, even though some might say that politics does not necessarily mean the practice of democracy. However, people ask me, all the time, why did you join politics? And my answer is, because I believe that politics can be a force for good for any country and society if people actively participate in it through public reason or public reasoning. And if we look at the key Girmitia countries today, we find that military coups happen in Guyana, long time back, in Suriname, in Fiji, an attempted coup in Trinidad and Tobago. The type of governance matters in how a country does economically and how it is able to look after its people and how people in a diverse, pluralistic society are able to maintain their identity, yet, coexist peacefully. I wrote a paper sometime back, which was published in the International Journal of Social Economics, where I showed that Fiji was actually better than Mauritius on almost all indicators in 1986. But since the 1987 coups and subsequent coups, one in 2000 and 2006, Dr. Ganesh was a minister in 2000 when we had the 2000 coup. Then we had one in 2006. We have kind of regressed and are far behind in most of the development indicators. And economist and Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, while studying Mauritius as a success story some years back, around 2011 or 2012, attributed its success to democracy, good governance, and an absence of a military in Mauritius. In fact, the Mauritians considered military to be a waste, in terms of expenditure. So perhaps we need more comparative studies of the Indian indentured diaspora countries on systems of governance, economy, etc., and the extent of public participation in politics, and whether we have, apart from a small group of people, whether we have argumentative Mauritians, Fijians, Trinidadians, Surinamese, of Girimitia descendants, or increasingly, we are part of a growing culture of sycophancy and civility amongst our people, and unable to deal with the challenges of our identity, politics, and governance. So, I want to leave all of you with these thoughts. But before I conclude, I want to say that we in Fiji remain extremely disappointed and disgusted that the government in Fiji continues to ban the preeminent historian on indenture or Girmit in Fiji and elsewhere, Professor Brij Lal and his wife, Dr. Padma Lal, from entering Fiji for over 10 years now. They've been banished from the land of their birth. We regard this as blatant discrimination against Professor Brij and Dr. Padma Lal, who are highly regarded by not only by the Indo-Fijian community, but also the whole Girimitia community globally. I mean, anybody studying Girmit and politics of the Girimitias, cannot escape Professor Brij Lal's, interesting work over so many years. So I hope that we will continue to condemn the actions of the government and call for the immediate lifting of the ban on Professor Brij Lal and Padma Lal. So finally, Farzana, I would like to once again, reiterate my thanks to you, Dr. Ganesh Chand, Ranjit. I think you guys have done a sterling job in pulling this conference. I can tell you that this is the longest that I've been on Zoom, trying to listen to all the very, very interesting presentations. And as Ravi said earlier, and I'm actually, as a politician and as a former academic, although I'd like to keep myself, in the eyes of people, to be an active academic, but as a politician, I can say that this is very, very exciting, and the work that you people have done in pulling this conference and the work of the Global Girmit Institute is phenomenal. And I want to warmly congratulate all of you for pulling this conference, and I look forward to participating in future conferences. But also let you people know that should we get into government next year, we will have a special place, as part of government policy to support and encourage and participate in the work that, the good work that people like yourselves and academics all around the world are doing on our Girimitia history and the challenges of the Girimitia community. So thank you very much for having me and for organizing this wonderful conference. Congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Prasad, for that very fitting concluding address and reminding us of the relevance of this conference to our wider society. And you have asked very pertinent questions, which definitely need to be addressed, hopefully in the next journal. And I'm sure we all wish you well with your endeavors as well. To add to your comments, Professor Pal Ahluwalia has announced that USP will also partner with us on the journal Indenture papers. Thank you, Professor Ahluwalia. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our conference. And what a conference it has been. I hope that you have enjoyed the incredible presentations, had some lively debates, and shared a few laughs with other participants. It has been such a pleasure to have been part of this conference with you all. I will now provide concluding remarks as conference convener on behalf of the conference organizing committee. Our conference had two overarching themes, the old indenture and the new indenture. In terms of the old indenture aspect of our conference, it was wonderful to see discussions that focused on the global mechanisms of indenture processes, the national level, institutional level, plantation level, and a recent interest in indenture studies, the individual level experience of both indenture and post-indenture, which we saw in biographical presentations about men and women who worked in different capacities within the indenture system. And we also heard about the lives of the children on the plantation, which is a much needed area of research. What I most particularly enjoyed were all the young presenters, and there were many of them. The presentations were excellent, so well done to you all. I also like the fact that the indenture theme of the program did not have only Girmikia descendants as presenters, we had them, but we also had indigenous Fijians presenting on this topic. Vinaka Vakalevu, you spoke to my heart, because indenture is not just the history of people with indentured heritage, it is our collective history as a people of Fiji and the Pacific. The presence of young scholars and their enthusiasm about the topic bodes well for the future of indenture studies. And we need a lot more such engagement that allows us to acknowledge Girmit as important in the collective memory of Pacific history. Ironically, indenture is recognized as a significant event in the collective memory of the world, as seen in the Indentured Labor Route project, but it does not appear to be as well represented within our Pacific history and also Fiji's national history. In terms of Fiji, indenture provides us with a valuable opportunity to acknowledge and appreciate the acts of solidarity and nation building between two communities forcibly brought into contact through colonialism. This is why we believe that this conference is so important. The presence of scholars from the field of Melanesian bonded labor was also a wonderful outcome of this conference. Melanesian bonded labor is another important aspect of Pacific history that requires a lot more attention, particularly in terms of the intergenerational memory of the communities and the intergenerational social and economic impacts of this dislocation and relocation of people. The conference also covered the significant concern of new indentures, and the conference provided a valuable platform to look at what we have learned about the historical occurrences in terms of the old indenture, Girmit, blackbirding, and how we can apply that valuable knowledge to provide recommendations to help eliminate the occurrence of new indenture systems. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors who made this conference possible: Global Girmit Institute, Polytech, Pacific Polytech, Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and Fiji Institute of Applied Sciences. An immense thank you to our chairs over the 3 days: Professor Shailendra Singh, Professor Sunil Kumar, Professor Rajni Chand. If you look at the program, you will notice that our chairs were facilitating sessions well after midnight. So this was an immense contribution and commitment on their part. Thank you very much, Rajni, Shailendra, and Sunil. In fact, words fail me to adequately express my gratitude to you all. Our participants would know by now the team that has been working tirelessly day and night behind the scenes, led by Dr. Ganesh Chand from Global Girmit Institute, Ms. Bhavika Shiuram, and the head of our IT side of things, Mr. Ranjit Raju. Thank you to all of you who have presented and participated in the conference, either as presenters or as audience members. We have valued your support immensely throughout the organization period and also during the conference. We hope that the conference provided you with a platform to engage with similarly dedicated scholars such as yourself. Please don't forget that you can submit your full papers to the new journal, Indentured Papers. We're already now talking about the next conference. So it gives me great pleasure to announce that the next conference will be held at BHU with ILRP support. Keep well, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Vinaka Vakalebu and Shukriya to you all from the South Pacific region.